With that, I wanted to share something. Last week, we talked about apprenticeships, and we're diving in through the course of this month around our values as a church family and what makes us a little different. And I shared a story last week about spiritual parenting and how my wife, Janine, does that really well. And what we talked about was that, sometimes this discipleship, this apprenticeship can get a little bit messy, but when you're developing who you are and you're spending a lot of intentional time with others, that really is, in and of itself, discipleship. And so that's what Janine did with a few girls. And a couple days after last Sunday, we got this. Well, I didn't get it, and you'll see that in a second. Janine got this Mother's Day card. Dear Mom, Janine Kohler, Happy Mother's Day. I thought about just texting you on Mother's Day, but I know you are a lover of all things cute. Why she married me. And I thought, she's not even here to defend that. So all things cute, and I thought this card was perfectly cute. I just wanted to really thank you for making me the woman I am today. You are the role model I needed, and I catch myself trying to act more and more like you with different life decisions. Without you, I wouldn't have learned to be a good host with patience and kindness. You truly impact everyone that walks into your home with your generosity, and seeing that in high school has made me incredibly more intentional with everyone I meet. You prayed for me countless times, and more importantly, you taught me the power of prayer. This is one of the reasons I have been successful thus far. I wish this card was longer so I could fit all the reasons I am thankful for you in it, but I guess that means I'll just have to fly out very soon. That's true. Lily, you're always welcome. I thought that was a beautiful piece, that when we invest in the lives of people, when we are willing to spiritually parent people, that's what happens. We get to teach people what it looks like to open ourselves, and we're actually going to be talking a lot about that. Lily was part of a group that actually met in our home, what we call now a community. Lily was part of one of the first communities that we successfully launched. Lily was awesome. I remember she was the only girl that showed up very early on in the community that we were planting, and she was the only girl. There were about 5 other people starting out, and the others were all guys. And afterward, Lily had come, and we were like, I'm not sure what she thinks about this. And we got done with it, and she looked at us. She goes, there's no other girls here. I'm like, yeah, that's true. She said, I'm going to fix that. And that's Lily. She's awesome. We'd got to do a lot of stuff with those that gathered around our house, gathered around our table. And just a quick disclaimer, we did not do all of these things well. Some of the time we actually failed pretty hard. And there were some nights we were walking away and we're like, I'm not sure anybody's going to show up again. And so we definitely did not do everything perfectly, but we got some things right. And sometimes we did those things better than other times. One of those things that we got right was what we're going to be talking about today, which is living sacrificially. We had purposed that in this family, in that community that we were leading, we wanted this family that we were a part of to live sacrificially with one another. Now, it was interesting because at the time, actually, that group was predominantly high school students that we just were able to welcome in, that were coming from all sorts of different walks of life and various states of family. And I remember that what was meant to be kind of this communal sacrificial living ended up looking very differently, but it was still there. What we found was that students and other people would show up and they didn't have a whole lot in their refrigerators, and so we would find that we were sending people home with bags of groceries. And so we actually had to start stocking our refrigerator up a little bit extra and our cupboards with some healthier non-perishables so that people could actually just kind of come shopping through our refrigerator and take a small bag of stuff that they could, get by with for the next week for just themselves, because oftentimes that's just what it was. And it was really beautiful. It actually got to the point where it wasn't just our spiritual family, our community, that was sacrificing on behalf of one another and meeting needs, although that was true. It started to kind of ripple out as we were telling stories of what was happening in the community. And we had other people that were sacrificing and living sacrificially on our behalf. And so they said, well, how long is it sustainable for you to fill your refrigerator that way? We're like, well, it wasn't sustainable the first time we did it. And they're like, okay, so I want you to come shopping through our refrigerator, and I want you to take from us so that you can give. The very first week we got to tell a story. I remember somebody came up to me afterward and they said, hey, we have massive frozen turkeys and we have all sorts of stuff in our freezer in the garage. Would you just come take whatever you want? Please, come after church today and take whatever you want. And so I did. We had other people who just started sending monthly checks in order to support this work. It was their buy-in. It was their investment. It was how they could live sacrificially, even though life didn't allow them to enter in the same way that they wish they could. We even had one week, a need was made known in our community, and we were trying to meet that as directly as we could, and somebody from the family stepped up and wrote a very sizable check in order to cover the entire thing. It was impressive. And what we actually kind of started joking about is one girl came to faith because she was the recipient of a lot of this blessing. She was not a Christian when she entered in, and she started following Jesus, and it was beautiful. And we joked with her all the time. We said, Emma, Jesus literally bought you with money. And that's kind of how it seemed. It was like God was buying these people, just meeting their needs, because there was this just extensive generosity that was being poured out. And it occurred to me that this is supposed to be one of the main marks of the family of those who follow Jesus, is we are supposed to take care of one another unparalleled in anywhere else in society. There should be nobody who carries that level of care for one another. And again, it wasn't just me and my wife and my kids kind of sacrificing our space and our time and ourselves. That was included, but it was so many more people. And then we found that one of the women that my wife worked with, she was really into New Age beliefs, and she started hearing Janine tell the stories about what was going on in our house. And so she showed up to one of the meals with us, and she started giving her life to Jesus. And it wasn't like everything was transformed overnight, but she kind of changed her direction from following one way to now following Jesus. Why? Because we lived sacrificially. Not just us, but those who are in our extended spiritual family. Now, that would be really awesome if that was always my heart. That is not always my heart. Actually, we have a couple pictures. This actually represents my true heart. This is going on, all right, elsewhere in the United States, where people are lining up at the pumps because there's a gas shortage. And this, the pictures, you could do a simple Google search and the pictures just get funnier and funnier, although I guess maybe it's not so funny, of people filling up massive trash bags in the trunk of their car full of gas. I'm not sure how that went on the travel home, or going out and clearing out the entire section of one of the home improvement stores of all of their gas containers, because they were filling those up, 55-gallon drums being filled up with fuel in the back of pickup trucks. Because at my heart, what I want to do is I want to hoard. Right? This is in all of our recent histories, right? That's a toilet paper shelf, completely lacking toilet paper. Now, everybody's like, I'm not sure I'm identifying with the gas situation, but that TP shortage, I felt that. You feel me? We resonated with this TP shortage. And if I'm being honest, I'm looking out around at everybody else who is buying as much as they, carts and palletfuls of toilet paper. And I'm thinking, am I supposed to get in on this? What is happening? Should I be doing this? Am I going to go without? Because here's what's at the heart, really at my heart. While I want to live generously, while I want to live sacrificially, at my heart, and I would argue at maybe a lot of our hearts, is this mentality of scarcity. We live in general with a scarcity mentality, and I really love how Erin M. Straza is a phenomenal author. She has a good book on getting out of your comfort zone, and she writes this: scarcity mentality measures out life by the ounce. It always concludes that the needs outweigh the resources. Let me read that one more time. Scarcity mentality measures out life by the ounce. It always concludes that the needs outweigh the resources. Now, maybe we sit here today, maybe you sit here today and you're like, I don't have a problem hoarding my money or my possessions. That's really easy. But maybe for some of us sitting here today, that is true, that, if I give more money, I won't have enough to meet my needs. But maybe for the majority, or for others of us, it doesn't sound like that. Maybe it sounds more like if I give, I won't have as much to invest. My retirement in the future or even now is on the line. If I give more, then I won't have that. If I give to them, maybe this is our thought. If I give to them, they'll just blow it on something pointless. And so we get in this scarcity mentality by justifying it, looking at other people's lifestyles and saying they're undeserving. But what that really does is it just protects us. Maybe it's not money oriented or giving oriented. Maybe it's opening up our space, and we get caught in the scarcity mindset of, if I open my space, what will happen to my things? If I open up my home to other people, if I'm hospitable, what will happen to my things? What if they get broken or taken advantage of? We struggle with this too. Maybe it's emotional or self-oriented. How can I love others when, here's the scarcity mentality, when I myself was not loved well? You see, scarcity mentality can look all sorts of different ways, and it inhibits living sacrificially. However, living sacrificially anyway, I think might be the answer. Because the question then is, in the midst of crisis, right, when our character is revealed, who are the people of God called to be? Crisis always reveals character. We've seen that this last year, but even so, even without crisis, our character is still met in these mini crises of, if I give to them, then I don't have. Whatever the giving of self or possessions or money is, the question then is, what is the call for us as the people of God? And what is the good news to the world around us? You see, if I join in that line, if I join in the panic, if I join in the hoarding, if I join in all of those things and I do not give, I'm feeding into that scarcity mentality. I want to invite you to explore with me the answer out of Hebrews chapter 13. It's the end of the letter to Hebrews. It's a nice, confusing, and wordy and weighty letter about all things Jewish sacrificial system. It's phenomenal, but admittedly, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to understand. But what I love is that time and time again, these authors come to us in the Bible with these really long explanations, but then they give a really nice summary at the end. So if you don't always understand things, I would encourage you just to keep reading. It usually makes a little bit more sense at the end, and that's exactly what happens here in Hebrews, that if we're not familiar with the Jewish sacrificial system, my guess is most of us are not. If you are not familiar with the Jewish sacrificial system, then it might not all make a ton of sense. But if we read all the way through to Hebrews chapter 13, we find that the author gives us a little bit of a summary. And so we're going to read a sizable chunk. Okay, we're going to read the first 16 verses of Hebrews. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, because God has said, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings. It is good for our hearts to be strengthened by grace, not by eating ceremonial foods, which is of no benefit to those who do so. We have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. The high priest carries the blood of the animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name, and do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices, God is pleased. Now, I want you to listen really closely because I'm going to give you our main point up front, which is not my normal method. Make you wait for it. So listen, because I want you to view this whole section in a unified whole. And the punchline is most certainly at the end, but this is at the heart of it. We must carry the message of the gospel in our sacrificial living. Okay? We must carry the message of the gospel in our sacrificial living. The way we live in sacrificing to one another bears testament to the sacrifice of Jesus. We'll see that all throughout here, but we have to pay attention. That's why I want you to pay attention to it. As we read each statement, I want you to understand gospel, sacrificial living. Gospel and sacrificial living. So our first section is actually verses 1 through 3, and they're actually linked very well. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to the strangers. The weird comment about angels. Continue remembering those in prison as if you were suffering with them. All right, so these three are actually linked. Again, remember, gospel, sacrificial living. Let's break it down just a little bit more. We have first a reference to loving one another as family. Now, if you've spent any time with family, which at least all of you did to some extent, you'll realize something really quickly. They're not always easy to love, are they? Like if you just had your choice, if you just got to pick those relationships, there were times where you would probably readily throw those relationships aside and choose easier ones. But the reality is that's not how it works. We are called to love one another as we love our family. This enduring love that requires personal sacrifice. Where does that love come from? We'll get there in a second. Hint, has to do with the gospel. All right? He goes on to, after loving one another, he qualifies that a little bit more. And he says, this is, in a sense, he's expanding it here when he talks about hospitality and visiting people in prison. So love one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. Now, it's interesting because by hospitality, most of us would think of our regular understanding of hospitality, which means to invite somebody over, to serve them the best meal we know how to make. It's going to have the best stuff that we know how to prepare, and it's going to be delicious. We want them to have a good experience in our home. After that, we're going to collect their dishes. We're going to make sure that they're just at ease. It's going to be a great experience for them. We're going to host. That's kind of how we understand hospitality. However, that's not how the recipients of this letter would have first understood hospitality. Hospitality in the ancient Near East would have been much more self-giving. In some ways, less stressful. In other ways, more work and more sacrifice. Because in order to offer somebody true Middle East hospitality, it would mean actually welcoming them into your family. That's why it's actually following that verse 1. Love your brothers and sisters as this spiritual family, right? Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. That's kind of the definition of hospitality. It actually means not just hosting, not just preparing things, although that may be included at times. It actually just means letting them into your space, sharing with them who you are. Here's the reality. You can be hospitable and never have somebody in your house. Because true hospitality is self-giving. It's giving of who you are. It's giving of what you have, and it's saying you are now a part of my family, at least while you're with me. That's how we actually probably need to understand hospitality. It's not entertaining. It's not making sure people have a good time. It's not this relationship of reciprocity where you have me over and then we'll have you over the next time, and we'll participate in this unspoken competition of who can do it better. It will actually be just a self-giving nature of who I am. You are welcome to be a part of me. You are welcome in my space. And if we can't be in my space, then guess what? I will give you all that I have in the moment, which may just mean my undivided attention. Yes, it's true. Hospitality can mean just simply giving somebody the time of day. Now, it's qualified a little bit further because it doesn't just talk about hospitality. Our author also says to strangers. Now, if we're showing hospitality to complete strangers, and guess what strangers actually means? Strangers. Okay? If the text means strangers, then we most certainly should be showing hospitality to those who are not strangers, to those who are in our everyday lives, to those we rub shoulders with and elbows with on a regular basis. Those too would be recipients of our hospitality. We have the weird note about angels. Now, we've talked about hyperlinks in the text before, and this right here is a hyperlink, takes us all the way back to Abraham, where he meets with the three angelic beings, and he ends up offering them his hospitality, which is not in a house. It's actually out in a field underneath trees, and they prepare food, and they make sure that they're taken care of for their journey, and one of them ends up being revealed as the Lord himself. This is the understanding, and it actually links us to verse 3. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as you yourselves are suffering. Now, there are all sorts of phenomenal prison ministries all over the country, probably all over the world. I don't have the experience to be able to tell you that one way or the other. But we have these ministries that are out to love everybody in prison, and that's a good and worthwhile thing. We should care for everyone who is in prison. However, that is not the statement that is being made here. The statement that's actually being made here is continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison. You see, we understand prison, you broke the law severely enough, you end up being sent to jail or some form of that. However, that was not their reality. You could be thrown in prison for any number of days for any reason until you were tried and convicted, and then your sentence would be carried out in some format. And most certainly what the author is doing is linking this to people who were actually known in prison that were part of this church family. Keep on loving one another, sacrificially loving one another, especially those who are part of this family that are in prison. Because they don't get to take care of their own needs. That's how the system worked. They couldn't meet their own needs. They had to be provided for by friends and family. So remember them as if you were suffering with them. That's how much you are supposed to care for them. The level to which you are to sacrifice for those people who are suffering is identification with their sufferings. That's severe, severe sacrifice. And this is just the first section. We continue on. Marriage should be honored by all. Marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer, sexually immoral, and keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have, because God has said, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you. The Lord is my helper. What can mortals do to me? This section, again, is together. And the main underlining thing here we have to say is be content. Whether it is in your sexuality, your intimate relationships, whether it's in your possessions, whether it's in your finances, be content. I don't know if you've ever tried to practice contentment before. It is a serious exercise in sacrificial living. Because what we find is that our discontentment is oftentimes not disassociated with the rest of our lives. Our discontentment is not over here while all the rest of our experiences are over there. Our discontentment and our experiences are together, which means we are discontent for a reason. Whether it is in our sexuality, whether it is in our dating relationships, our marriage relationships, lack of marriage relationships, whether it's in our possessions and wanting and desiring whatever you could possibly want and desire, discontentment in those areas points to something else. It points to unfulfilled need. It points to maybe a sense of brokenness or a sense of loss. I don't always connect it in my thinking, but growing up, I can't tell you how many times that I learned that our needs were provided by coming home with the family to find a bag of groceries on our front porch, because for most of my growing up, we lived at the poverty line or below. I didn't realize it at the time, but those experiences of understanding that if those groceries didn't show up, our needs may have not been met. Maybe it's where part of my scarcity mentality comes out. Discontentment is always related to our past. It's always related to our brokenness or our sinfulness or whatever. There's a long list of things, but contentment itself is not isolated. Or discontentment itself is not isolated. We have to understand, where does that discontentment come from? Because the author says, in all of these things, Paul elsewhere has said in his own writing that, are you married? Be content with that marriage. Don't look for something else. Are you unmarried? Be content. He said, I've learned in having a lot to be content with what I have, and I've learned how to be content with having nothing. Contentment is a hard and serious practice that requires sacrifice. It requires something of us, being willing to give up, knowing, again, we have a little bit of a pointing to the gospel here, that God himself has said, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, and the Lord is my helper. Knowing these things is the source of our contentment. Whatever the brokenness is, whatever the lack is, whatever the missing or the wound is, Jesus himself starts to come to the surface here as the answer. Let's continue on, verse 7. Remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you, consider the outcome of their life, and imitate their faith. We have a little bit of throwback to last week in discipleship. I love that. Are you struggling to understand discipleship? It's this. Give somebody an example in your life that they can imitate in their own life. That's it. What does it look like to follow Jesus? Give somebody an imitable example. Why? Because Jesus Christ, here he's coming to the surface right here. The gospel, the reason for our sacrificial living is coming to the surface. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings. It is good for our hearts to be strengthened by grace, not ceremonial foods. They don't do anything. My paraphrase, clearly. We have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. Now, this can be somewhat confusing language if we don't slow down to understand, again, the scope of the letter, which is about the sacrificial system. The sacrificial system in all of Israel's existence meant to point toward the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus. All the sin sacrifices, the sacrifice of atonement, all of those things were meant to point to Jesus. And oftentimes these sacrifices, if they were burnt sacrifices, would be offered up and essentially grilled, okay, good food, and then eaten. That happened with a majority of the sacrifices. They were burnt and they were eaten. The author here pulls out that reality and says those ceremonial foods, those sacrifices, they have no weight here. Why? Because Jesus has already come. He is the ultimate sacrifice. He was the one that all of those sacrifices foreshadowed and pointed toward. Now we have an altar that is the cross of Jesus. Verse 10, we have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. The author is saying, if you wish to still exist in Old Testament sacrifice, you can have no part with the ultimate sacrifice. If you wish to hold on to those areas of comfort, everything that you knew that it meant to follow Yahweh as a Jewish person, if you wish to hold on to those, then you cannot participate with the cross of Jesus, here referred to as the altar. You can't take part in the sacrifice of Jesus. Not that we actually eat it, but you can't have a part of it. Verse 11, the high priest carries the blood of the animals in the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. Now let's pause there and unpack this really quickly. Again, we are in the metaphor of the sacrificial system, and one thing that was true is that dead bodies were unclean. Burnt sacrifices and the rest of whatever was left had to be disposed of in some way. Lepers themselves had to have a place to go. Anything that was unclean had to have a place to go, and it was determined that outside the city gates, outside the camp, was the place that the refuse and the unclean and everything worthy of being thrown away was tossed. Inside the city was the place of sacrifice. Inside the camp was the place of holiness, here referred to as the most holy place, right? The presence of God where he dwelt. That all takes place inside the camp, inside the city. Jesus himself, however, was not allowed inside the holy place. He was not allowed inside the camp. He was crucified with refuse and with the unclean outside the camp. His sacrifice took place outside of the comforts of Jewish regular life. He was relegated outside of the camp to the place of the throwaway, to the place of the nothingness. And this is where the gospel comes to the front and center the most powerfully. This is where the author is driving his point home, that Jesus' sacrifice offers us a sacrifice. Therefore, let us then go to him outside the camp. Let us leave behind everything that is comfortable, everything that we've come to know that is safe and secure, our way of living, all the things that we have used to fill our needs. Here, it's their sacrificial meals and their systems that they've become accustomed to. For us, it's a whole host of other things that we've become attached to. Let us leave those things inside the camp and join him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. Let us join in the pattern of Jesus in the level of sacrifice that he gave. That's the punchline, folks. That's the heart of it. That's where we find the reality that we must carry the gospel in our sacrificial living. We must carry the gospel in our sacrificial living, because the one who went before, Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, was crucified outside the city gates so that we could leave behind the comfortable, the easy, our scarcity mentalities, and join him outside the city and take part in the sacrificial living that we see him pattern for us. That's what this is about. Everything that preceded this points to this: the loving, the hospitality, the identification, the contentment. All of this is seen as being related to the sacrifice of Jesus. And the only way to attain a lifestyle that looks like that, even remotely, is to join in with Jesus, who was crucified outside the camp. Let us join him in his sufferings. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. Now, this is not at all a reference to us dying, leaving earth, and going to heaven. That's not what this is. It might sound like it, might sound good, but the reality is, this is echoing what was said just a chapter earlier in the book of Hebrews, which is anything that can be shaken will be shaken, and whatever cannot be shaken will remain. Meaning everything that remains is of God. It is of his kingdom. Where is this kingdom? It is now here on earth, not fully, but in part. And one day, that which cannot be shaken will join everything else that is created anew, and we will take part of the city of God, which will be a place on earth. Not disembodied, some far away. That's just some interim state that we don't actually fully understand. The true destination is for us to live in community with one another, of one heart, with the Trinitarian person of God. That is our destination, and we are supposed to live sacrificially now in practice for that time. We are a practicing sacrificial community, living an alternative lifestyle in this world, in the here and now. That's the call. We must carry the gospel, the good news of Jesus, that he suffered so that we can see it, so that we can understand it, so that we can benefit from it, and we can participate in it, so that we can meet the needs of those around us. The author takes all of this and he's talking about there's no more need to sacrifice the way that we saw it sacrificed. Verse 15, therefore, though, Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. Again, picking up this idea that we do not sacrifice the way all of Jewish history is sacrificed. We sacrifice differently, tied to the person of Jesus. This is the sacrifice. It gives us two ways. The first way, the fruit of lips that openly professes his name. Okay, so worship and the public profession of who Yahweh is. And then secondly, and do not forget to do good and to share with others. For with such sacrifices, that's worship of God, profession of his name, and doing good and sharing with others, for which such sacrifices God is pleased. This is our new mode of sacrifice. Now, to us, we might understand like, well, we don't burn sacrifices. This was revolutionary for the community that was receiving this letter. For all of those that would read this letter, this was mind-blowing because it was an encouragement. It was an affirmation of what they were learning to do. You see, in the early church, they were actually known as atheists. Weird, right? This is why they were known as atheists, because the world around them all believed in sacrifice to something. It wasn't a matter of if you sacrificed, it was to whom do you sacrifice? There were all sorts of gods and belief systems. The Jews offered burnt sacrifices in preparation for Yahweh, and then there were all sorts of other sacrificial systems. However, the early church offered no sacrifice other than the worship of God and doing good to others. That was their sacrifice, but it could not be seen. It could not be witnessed, and so the world around them just assumed there is no God in their life. Atheists. However, the more time they spent with them, they learned about the person of Jesus, and it rubbed off. So much so that we have the description in the book of Acts as numbers being added to daily. This is the result of sacrificial living. This is our call to sacrifice, that we worship God from whole and sincere hearts, and that we do good to others and share with others, and this is the sacrifice with which God is pleased with. It's a big call, though. I want to give us 3 steps that we can take, probably not this week. Maybe we can start working on step 1 this week, but I want to give us 3 kind of actionable points that we can walk out this over the coming days, that we can start to practice with one another. You see, this is a primary value of this church family, sacrificial living. We want it to mark everything that we do in our gatherings. We want to live sacrificially. In our classes that we participate in, we want to live sacrificially with the community that we make, and most certainly in our communities where we gather together organically and purposefully and intentionally, we want to live sacrificially. But in order to do that, I want to point out just 3 things that we noted from the text. First is be content with what you have. Be content with what you have. Now, this is hard, again, because it's easy to say live simply or be content with what you have. It's a whole lot harder to actually do it, because once we get into it, we realize there are sources of our discontentment. There are things and needs and brokennesses that we had that we were trying to fill with something else, and now we have to acknowledge it. It's one reason why I personally practice silence and solitude. Silence and solitude is an absolute lack of any other stimulus, and it allows me to be alone with the Lord and realize that all I have is this. What I feel, what I think, what I'm walking through, my situations and my context, all of that between me and the Lord, and I can't run from it. I can't numb it anymore. At a certain point, friends, we have to stop running. We have to stop stimulating ourselves with one thing or another, and we have to start looking to the Lord, who is the same, Jesus, the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is consistent. And whatever the source of our discontentment, he can be the answer. That's going to require us to slow down, to do some serious heart check and say, what am I running from? What am I numbing? So I would encourage you at some point in time this week, just sit alone with the Lord in silence and ask the Holy Spirit, just say, Holy Spirit, would you reveal to me the source of my discontentment? Maybe it can't be a time set aside. Maybe it has to be in the moment where we feel that discontentment rise up and we look for the numbing thing that we normally go to, or we look at our source of escape, or we look to add just another thing to our possession list. Maybe we stop at that moment and say, Lord, what am I running from? Holy Spirit, would you reveal that in my heart? And he will. He will. That's step one. Be content with what we have. You see, the things aren't bad. Money isn't bad. Relationships aren't bad. Those are all good. Sexuality is good. Marriage is good. Things are good. Money is good, but they're only good and beautiful in relationship to being set apart for the Lord. They find their true value when we can be content with God. Second is giving of our time and of our space. We're going to live sacrificially. Generosity is a huge marker for this kind of value. And first, we give of our time and space. Once we can find those places of contentment, we give of our time and space. Again, hospitality doesn't mean entertaining. It doesn't mean hosting. It means giving of ourselves. It means allowing who we are to become the greatest gift the world around us could receive. See, that's true about you and about me. The greatest gift you and I can give to the world around us is not what we have, although that's good. It's not what we can do, although that's good. It's who we are. It's who you're becoming. That's the greatest gift you give to the world around you. We read this note, right, to Janine, and I just use it as an example. It's not it's a good example. It's not any different than is accessible to anybody else's life. Do you know what Janine did? She spent a lot of time with people. She developed who she is. She developed her walk with the Lord. She made sure that her heart was worth sharing with others, and then she just shared it with others. That's it. She spent a lot of time with people who needed to learn how to follow Jesus. That's it. She shared herself. That's at the true meaning of hospitality. That's at the true meaning of opening up our space to others, is first opening up ourselves to others. And then finally, giving of your possessions. Giving of your possessions, now moving from the heart all the way to the physical possessions. And the first and probably the hardest of these, it's the second most talked about topic in the Bible, is money. Right? You knew I was going to talk about it at some point. Money. Right? We have all sorts of passages about the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, and that's true. But money in and of itself is not bad. It is a gift of God when we realize one thing, that it is God's. It is God's, and it is a tool meant for his purposes. We got to have a fun conversation with my oldest son this last week, where he was worried about somebody coming into his space and messing it up. Those are his possessions, right? He was worried about them breaking his things, messing up his things, and what will happen to them. And we got to have a good conversation about, well, it's hard to accept, but the reality is those aren't your things anyway. Yes, we have to care for them. Yes, we have to keep them nice. We have to do our best to be good stewards of those things, but those are God's. It is not up to you to say, no, you can and you can't. This is God's, and we will freely steward it. This is extreme generosity that we are trying to instill in an 11-year-old mind. That's where it starts. You and I are not 11-year-olds. You and I are dealing with different budgets and different sorts of amounts of money, but here's the reality is we are called to an extreme generosity with our money as well. It is not yours. It is not mine, as much as I would love to do whatever I want with it. Now, historically, money has been given to the church. It was put into one large pot and then out of that redistributed. Over time, that's kind of gotten viewed with a little bit more skepticism as churches have become increasingly run like businesses, and seems to us that all businesses or government organizations have some sort of an agenda. Therefore, I will no longer give to the church because they have an agenda. Makes sense. I get it. I get it. However, I don't think that there is a better model for meeting the greatest needs in our community than still understanding that what you have to offer each other is good and should be the primary place of giving, but what we can do when we pool our resources, whether that is possessions, money, or who we are, is all better together. There are things that I can meet in my neighborhood on my own with my own finances, but there are other needs in this community that we can only tackle together. By pooling our resources in this pot and then giving it out as needed. That is our heart, and that is what we will still fight to preserve, this beautiful history of giving to the church. And so I would ask you, maybe there has been a time, if you've been with this church for a long time, where that generosity and that heart kind of dried up. And we said, you know what, I'm not happy with how things are going, and so I'm going to stop contributing to the pot. I would ask you humbly and graciously to examine where that discontentment is coming from. Not because I want the money here. Hear me clearly. If you don't give here, God will still take care of us. It's good. I'm not worried about whether you give or not. However, there is a piece of our obedience and discipleship that is tied to our giving. And this is a good place to give. If you find something in this family that you cannot support, that you don't line up with, and you say, listen, I just can't buy in, then maybe you need to find a place you can buy in. It's that important. If you can't contribute here, find a place you can contribute. It's okay. It's all the same family. We love you either way. But I want to encourage you, buy in. The church is a great place to give. However, it's not the only place to give. We are called to generosity, not to give to the church, right? The church is a great recipient of generosity. I welcome the giving, right? However, it's not the only place to give. There are all sorts of other places to give. When Janine and I were first married, we lived very humbly, very simply. We didn't have a lot of money. In fact, on paper, our budget never worked. It just didn't. Like, we would list out the bills and then we'd list out our income and we're like, I don't know how this is happening. How have we lived this long? Like, it was so bad that our friends who wanted to get married around us and their parents were concerned about their finances, they said, look at Dan and Janine. If they can do it, we can do it. I'm not joking. They said that. It was that bad. Yet somehow we made it, and God provided. All of that to say, we still wanted to give. We still wanted to be generous. We still wanted to do what we could do in obedience to God's call to live sacrificially. And so the best I could do at some points of our life was to make sure that I carried around a $10 gift card in my pocket so that I was prepared to give to anybody in need. It wasn't much. It was $10 for groceries, but I was purposed not to just give cash to anybody because I don't know where that cash could go. I've heard from a number of good sources that cash is not beneficial in a homeless scenario. Other things that they can't sell is. And so the best I could come up with was grocery store gift card. Similar, but not the same. But I was prepared because I didn't want to have to scramble in the moment that I felt conviction to be generous in a spontaneous place. I didn't want to have to scramble to figure out how to do that. I had tried before in the moment past. I wanted to be ready to be generous. That's all I'm asking today. Are you ready? Is your heart prepared to be generous? If we are going to live sacrificially, we live sacrificially with our money as well. And here, I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. We worry about this understanding of tithe. We worry about how much do we give. It's been a conversation going on for years. To be perfectly honest, we can unpack it more personally. Tithe is actually not a biblical concept. Just drop that really quick. But here's what C.S. Lewis says. I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. We can't settle how much we ought to. All we know is that the safe rule is to give more than we can spare. We see it as Jesus talks about the woman who gives all that she has to live on, and he holds her up as an example. It's far less in money than everybody else gave, but it was sacrificial. Now, I'm not asking anybody to go into debt. I am asking you to have a heart posture that is ready to do anything for generosity, to meet the need that you see in front of you, to follow the conviction of the Holy Spirit in the moment. That's what I'm asking. The Lord will take care of the rest because it is all his. Be ready to be generous. Don't have a fixed amount that you say, this is all we got. Maybe for some of you, being ready to be generous might just be 1%. Like, can we just set 1%? And I don't know why I'm fixating on these percentages because that's how we think. Maybe it's just, the next step is just a little bit. Maybe it's a $10 gift card. Maybe it's a bump up from what we've been doing. And we say, this has been easy. This is all just skimming the top. This is not living sacrificially. I'm asking you simply to consider those things. Again, John Piper, pastor and author and theologian, has a great take on tithing here. He says, my take on tithing in America is that it's a middle-class way of robbing God. Tithing to the church and spending the rest on your family is not a Christian goal, it's a diversion. The real issue is, how shall we use God's trust fund, namely all we have, for his glory? Underline that part, his glory. In a world with so much misery, what lifestyle should we call our people to live? What example are we setting? Here's what lifestyle I would ask us to live, whether it's with our money or any other possessions that we could name, whether it's with our space, our time, and our contentment. Here's what I'm asking you to do, to carry the gospel message in your sacrificial living. How you do that is between you and the Lord and the community in which you submit to. So easy to be like, well, that's between me and the Lord. No, please hear this last one. Between you and the Lord and the community you submit to. Okay? Let's pray.